I love the line where he's like, "Oh, I got the ingredients for gin and tonic. Isn't that your favorite drink? You got the ingredients for gin and tonic? You mean gin and tonic? What are you talking?"
Sweet Christmas.
Shout out to my birds.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Che.
This is Cory.
And this is the Next Time On Podcast, a podcast where two lifelong friends discuss all things amazing and all things fitted in popular culture. And today we will be talking about Black Hole by Charles Burns, the 1995 to 2005 epic about teenage angst and sex and a number of other things. I was going to promise again that we were going to be more consistent, Cory, because I did that last time, and then we took a whole other month off.
Well, listen.
Life gets in the way, is what...
Life got in the way. Yeah. I mean, listen, we both aged... We aged as people.
We're dead now. We're useless to society.
We are now podcasters who are 30, so I think we have to grapple with that conundrum.
I honestly, I think the one benefit of the fact that this endeavor has only net total cost us money. We cannot, we can't call ourselves podcasters, and that's a good thing.
That's fair. But like
we're just two dickheads. That's what we are.
We are just two dickheads with way too many opinions. But shit, a lot of life happened. So we're kind of all just kind of grappling with that. I would love for this strike to be over soon, but just
I think we all.
Let's talk about this very serious, melodramatic graphic novel.
At times a little too serious, but we'll get to that. Before we jump into Charles Burns' epic tome, though, we will a couple points of business as usual. Do not forget, if you are listening to us on any other platform besides YouTube, this is a YouTube video. These episodes in particular are good visual indicators because I'm going to bring up a lot of pages from the book, although I'm probably going to blur some stuff. I don't know what the rules are for YouTube. I'll figure that all out. But we got a lot of good visual stuff over there. That link is in the description below, or you can just go to at Next Time On all your social media platforms, YouTube, Threads, Instagram, or even on Twitter, although I don't open that app anymore. Maybe one day.
It's called X.
I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm not doing that.
No, it's fine. It's very okay.
And also don't forget, coming up pretty soon, we're going to be doing our Curse the Rewatch, which is Deep Blue Sea in sort of celebration of the Meg 2, which I saw in theaters and was horrendous.
You know what the problem is with Deep Blue Sea is it's been so long since I watched it.
Yeah, nobody told you to do that. Nobody told you to do that. I want that on the record.
So I have to. I think I watched it around 4th of July. So, oh my God, I have to rewatch it because I remember it, but I did not take any notes.
Yeah, fuck, luckily I haven't seen that for many, many years. We'll be doing that coming soon. We're going to drop a couple regular episodes on your head first, though.
That sucks for me, honestly. I'm not super excited for that.
Yeah, it does. And last but not least, don't forget to go over it at nexttimeon.net to see all of our archived podcast, all of our past and future writing, all that good stuff. But we got a pretty jam-packed episode for this book, so let's just jump into it. First things first, Cory, is who is the author, the creator of this book? I'll be straight up. I haven't read a lot of other stuff by Charles Burns.
Neither have I.
He also, for a man who is, if you have ever looked up top 10 comic books ever, you will see Black Hole in there. He is often lauded as one of the greatest cartoonists of all time. He's not very prolific. A couple of his works include El Borbaja, I think is how you say it, Borba, X'd Out, Big Baby, Last Look, and Skin Deep, I think are his other big books. But obviously, the first line in his biography is the Harvey Award-winning graphic novel, Black Hole, which was published between 1995 and 2005. And he seems to have done everything. He obviously did the art and the story, but I think he even did like the lettering, and there's no color in this, but I think he...
And also like one of the biggest things about this book is probably the inking.
Yeah.
Because it does forego color.
Yeah.
For a very, it's a really interesting style where like you can deliberately tell when it's like daytime and nighttime, and the characters definitely do get lost within the black and white of the book.
Yeah.
If you guys actually, like, I know you guys are listening to this, so you haven't actually read it, I do really recommend reading this book, or at least checking out the pages from it and checking out our YouTube for it, because the way that he draws, but his panel layouts and the way that he uses comic book paneling to describe and show off time is like really well done.
I think a big part of the art, which I would not say is like aesthetically beautiful, it's not something I'm going to hang on my wall, but I think that something that's technically incredible, like really impressive about it, is his use of shadowing. Like you were saying, he just
exactly that. Yes.
Where there's a couple pages that I pulled that we're going to get to later, where he just turns like pretty mundane scenes into horrifying moments just by the use of shadows, which I think is really impressive. And a big part, we were talking actually before, like has anybody ever taken this long, a decade, to publish a work that is comparatively pretty, I mean, it is a big book for those of you.
It is a big, it's a big book. I mean, it is 12 issues of a comic, which is
it's
like
massive, but
30, I mean, 30 pages each was like nothing to scoff at back in the day. I mean, most comics back then like ran for like what, 20, 21 pages.
But 30
so
pages
like,
a year is still a pretty slow pace. And
that's a pretty slow one. I mean, I was going to say Doomsday Clock, but that's just me being stupid.
Even Doomsday Clock, which we laugh about all the time, it was 12 issues in 3 years or something like that.
See, yeah, because I thought this was, so what basically, the reason I have this book in general is my old friend I worked with. He was like, you like comics? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, you can borrow these ones. And then the guy moved to Amsterdam. So, what's up, Dan? Thanks for the free books. But I thought I didn't research it.
Yeah.
Like, I remember reading it like a long time ago to the point I kind of forgot about it. I think I read through it so quickly. And going through now, I just checked the chapter. It's like, this is a weird fucking book. Mm-hmm. It's a very strange book. But also, I mean, speaking of Charles Byrne, I have not read anything else by him. So I realized I've never actually seen the first of the reboots of Planet of the Apes. Mm-hmm. It's mentioned in the Wikipedia page that this book is heavily appeared in that movie.
Yeah, it's in the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is the James Franco 2014 remake by Matt Reeves, the Corey's talking about. I remember the motif of this coming back because it is obviously like a pretty, much like the book, unsubtle reference to the fact that like a plague is taking over the world and like shutting everything down and transforming the world around us. I think at that time it was one of our go-to cultural references for a pandemic. Now, obviously, in the year of our Lord 2023, post the real pandemic, we have a few other examples of that. But yeah,
it's funny. I mean, I guess I wouldn't really even consider this. I mean, I know where we're going to talk about it, and like what it actually seems. We assume what the themes are from it. Yeah. I wasn't even thinking about it in like the sense of like an epidemic kind of vibe. But I guess you are correct.
Yeah.
And no, it's actually that makes a lot of sense to attach it to that. Because if I remember correctly, it's like the point of the movie they're trying to solve something, but then they end up.
The first Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which I haven't rewatched in a while, is like James Franco works in a lab with Andy Serkis, who is playing an ape whose name I can't remember, and like there is an outbreak of the disease that's killing everybody, right?
I think
and then also that disease that's killing all the humans ends up making apes smart. Again, this is a movie that I haven't seen in nearly a decade. I don't think I saw it since it was in theaters, although I do love those movies. Might go back and revisit it.
It's been a while. I mean, I've seen the second and third one. This movie's fucking slap.
Yeah. Anything else about Charles Byrne before we move on? Like I said, we both said we don't know a whole lot about him. He's from our hometown. He's a Washington, D.C.
I did know. I did see that. But no, like not much else about Charles Byrne. I mean, I don't think we I mean, for as prolific as he is, and as how
well I think when you spend 10 years writing one book, which is basically what happened from the years of 1995 to 2005, his bibliography is pretty light. He dropped a couple illustration books, but he's essentially just working on that for 10 years. So that's a big part of why he doesn't have a huge. I mean, he's not Tom King or Jeff Lemire. You know, there's not like 10 books we could pull from, but obviously you drop one banger, much like Nas, you can ride out into the sunset, although Nas keeps making albums.
But he could have.
He could have just stopped at Illmatic.
I'm interested. I mean, I'm probably going to go look into him a bit more, though. I'm interested, at least, like, honestly, like, to me, like, I kind of thought, I guess as we get into it now, pretty blanket thoughts for it, like, I thought the story was fine, but I think what the illustrations are definitely the thing that kind of kept me so glued to the page.
Yeah, I would not call Black Hole a narrative book. We can quickly run through the plot, but I think it
Yeah.
is worth doing very quickly because I don't really think even the plot is the point. It's the themes and the character exploration that Burns is exploring. But we'll just do that really quickly. I'll just run down what happens to these two characters. So we have two main characters that the book essentially alters between. You get one issue with a character named Keith, who is these are both high school students, but he is a high school boy who is, as all high school boys, obsessed with girls and drugs and drinking and hanging out with his friends. And in the midst of, we just basically join the story in media res, as there is this epidemic that is being basically a sexually transmitted disease called the bug, very creatively named.
Very creative.
And it is Keith is like a
Shithead.
I was gonna say like a nerd, like an outcast, but I don't know if that's even really fair. He's like one of those
incel. Sorry, he's not that bad.
I think that sort of thing comes later in the book.
It's like,
but early
it's
on,
like that kind of like nerdy, but like kind of like I'm too good for you kind of vibe.
He's like he's like a tweener, which is so. This book is set in the 70s, when Charles Burns would have been in his adolescence. It's sort of autobiographical, or maybe not autobiographical, but he in interviews I read, he's pulling from his life. I think this is very similar to like oh my god, why am I blanking on the movie? Richard Linklater.
Dazed and Confused.
Dazed and Confused, thank you. I was just thinking Boyhood over.
No, you know what? The funny thing is about that, I saw that movie for the first time about a month ago.
Yeah.
So reading this book was just so much of like
it's
is
very
like
similar.
It is so similar to Dazed and Confused if it was about a sexual. But yeah, it's a body horror, Dazed and Confused.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty intentional by both Linklater and Burns, who, aside from Burns's fascination with body horror and making this book that is a horror book, really, he's trying to pull reality from his childhood experiences. And Richard Linklater is, I think, at times maybe perversely obsessed with reality, and like Dazed and Confused is basically just an examination of 1970s high school.
I mean, I remember when I was watching it with a group of people. Like my friend had a screening because he's never seen it, so like 10 of us were watching it, and I was like, probably 45 minutes into it because I was very captivated by it. I'm like, what the fuck is the plot of this movie?
Yeah.
And I feel like in a way too, like that's kind of black hole where I'm like, what the fuck is the plot of this?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways they're both very like just true explorations of life and childhood and aging into adulthood. But we have our character Keith, who starts off as like a relatively normal teen. Like Cory said, kind of a shithead, as all teenage boys are, as I was, as I'm sure Cory was. I don't want to speak for Cory.
No.
He was a great man, actually.
I accept, absolutely. Never needed any personal growth.
But as the book goes on, we watch Keith sort of descend into darkness as he gets in, like, sort of driven wild by his desires, to the point in which he then has a relationship with this woman who I honestly can't remember if we even ever get her name, but I certainly don't remember
Elizabeth.
There we go. Because she's the lizard, right?
Yes.
Of course. Elizabeth, who has a tail as because she has the bug. Because the bug in this universe manifests itself in any number of different ways. We see some characters who become like deformed monsters and have to go live in the woods. And then we see some characters who get like some boils on their side, like Chris does, and like he gets little phalanges, and then can just go about living his real life. And really, that is like the journey of Chris. Again, like I said, there's not like a plot that is really the focus. We watch this character grow and change, and it's about the relationships they have with each other. On the other side, we have, or I said Chris. That was Keith's story. On the other side,
Keith, yeah.
We have Chris, who is, I think, in a lot of ways, the main character of this book, or at least Burns realizes by the end that she's the main character.
Yeah, she's the much more interesting person between the group, but she's like the prototypical like pretty high school girl.
Yeah.
Not particularly. I think she was like, she's not the most popular girl in school, but she's like the pretty girl.
She's the nice one. She's the star of every high
She's the
school.
nice
She's
one.
the popular one, but also nice.
Absolutely. Yeah, like we
All the
like her.
boys
We
like
want to
her.
root for
Yeah.
her, but you know, at the end of the day, she's also kind of a shithead too. So you know.
Yeah, I think as we said before before we got on, we were prepping. I think all the characters in this book are complicated but unlikable in a lot of ways. The same way that like I don't want to hang out with teenagers because they all kind of suck as far as I'm concerned. And Chris is no different. That she starts off, like you said, as a pretty popular straight A student, and then falls for a high school, basically like a high school jock. Rob,
Who's a dick.
Yes, who he himself has the bug, and they.
I mean, that guy's like 100% the main character from Dazed and Confused. It's like the same guy, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I think Dazed and Confused is a really good parallel to this book, aside from the body horror stuff, because they're both really pulling from, I would say, identical motifs. And Dazed and Confused is when? Dazed and Confused is 93, so a couple years, honestly, probably an influence. Burns lived through the 70s himself, but probably this idea of like really narratively realistic, true to life storytelling is probably very influential on Burns himself as he starts this book.
And I mean, and also as the book goes on, it becomes darker and darker because you know, like I mean, like we become more jaded. I'm assuming as time goes on.
Yeah. And then Rob, who has the bug, transfers it to Chris, and this starts really her downfall to the point that at the end, and we find her at the end of the book, and she's essentially a homeless alcoholic who has lost everybody and everything, and depressed,
almost suicidal. It's just
right. But along the way, she like runs away from her parents' house out of fear of them finding out that she has the bug, and goes and lives in the woods with sort of with a collection of other
outcasts.
Infected teenagers, but really on her own until she falls into a cycle where she has to she's out of food and resources.
Well, yeah, because her boyfriend, what was his name again? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Her boyfriend Rob gets beat to death. That's like kind of like in like so.
I would love to get to that scene and talk about it because I'm
we can get to this.
Confused about it.
Me too.
I don't really get what was going on there.
But I mean, that's kind of like, because I mean, like, it's very much the popular girl who runs away with the guy, but like, the story continues, and it's not in like a really good place where that love story would end. And it kind of just like when she loses him, and in her mind, it looks like he just kind of disappeared because nobody was able to find his like body or whatever.
I think eventually she comes to terms.
I think
he's dead.
But like, it's a very, you know, her story's very tragic. I think.
I think both character stories are very tragic. Even Keith's story ends happily, but it ends again. They've both been ostracized from society, and have sort of lost everything. And again, the book does span. The time it spans is a little bit unclear. It's a couple years. These are still at the most 20-year-olds.
Yeah, no, I don't even think it maybe gets to 20-year-olds.
Yeah, I would say.
I think honestly,
18, 19,
I think
something like
I
that.
think this is honestly less than a year, in my opinion.
Well,
or do you think it's longer?
I think the last few books span more time because we see like Keith moves like across the country,
Arizona, whatever.
He moves and starts a new job, and like he's doing other stuff. And the story of like Chris living in the tent, when we get the flashback, it seems like she's been in the tent for quite a while.
Fair.
Although again, this book plays a lot with time in a way that is odd because there's this house that Keith is house sitting, and eventually gets overrun by Chris and her sort of friends. But is that family on vacation for 1,000 years? What's going on?
It seems like it.
They're just gone forever.
They're just gone. It's just like, I think it's like, I feel like that was like lasting at least like a month. And he's like, I mean, I feel like they're going to come back at some point. I'm like, are you like, like you're like, are you like you're semi house sitting, but like, can you just like live there?
Not
Like,
only lived there, they like left their car.
left their car, they left everything, man.
I guess honestly, back in the 70s, you could just like fuck
Just
off.
like
for a
go
couple
on
months,
vacation.
right?
Yeah, I guess so. What else before we get into it? I mean, what was the rest of the plot? Yeah, because we mentioned that with.
I think those are the big.
Yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, it's like two characters going on their own separate journeys with this thing. Where I mean, at least like, I guess we're probably gonna get into it more, but like the two differences between Chris and Keith, where Chris, when she slept with Rob, because Rob's the one who gave her the bug, she didn't know, and it's not like Rob gave it to her like intentionally. She said, "I know," but in relation to Rob being in a relationship,
Yeah.
and not him actually having the bug.
Right.
Whereas with Keith, he knew going into it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Keith's the sexual journey with Keith and his like experience with Elizabeth is it ends in a way where they're in a relationship together and they've basically fled or whatever. But it does seem to me, especially on first meeting and second meeting, quite predatory. And I don't know if that's intentional or if this is me looking back on it with like 2023 eyes. But he's like
Talking about.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like Elizabeth on to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
It is a bit-
young kid, and she is older than college kids because she's living with college kids and is older than them. So she's in her at the youngest late 20s. This is like a 26, 27-year-old having a relationship with a 17, 18-year-old.
To the point she went to go find his ass at a grocery store later on.
Yeah,
It's not like she
tracks
like
him
went to go.
down.
She tracks him down she wants to find him again, and like I wonder how intentional that was by Burns in a way to be like, was it like creepy or is it just kind of like the mysteriousness of like the older woman who's like wise and like that's kind of like very much like it just like in his mind it's like somebody who's very lost and it's someone who's older,
Right?
And also like kind of piques the sexual interest of like what a teenager is. And so it's like I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it is definitely like. I mean, everyone in this, like, everyone's a bit lost. And I think Elizabeth as well. It doesn't seem like she's doing anything maliciously, but at the same time, it feels a bit weird.
Well, everyone in this book is a broken person in some way or another.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like
100%.
It's a lot like Peanuts, where we never see any adults because they might have their life together, and it's like we only ever float through these lives of like people between the ages of 16 and 30, and like they're all a bit of a mess and have sort of lost their way. You said like, is this intentional? I think this is a good as time as any to like talk about this book in relation to artist intention, because I don't think there's ever been a more clear example of artist intention and audience reception. And the sexual relationship between Lizzie and Keith was a big example of it, but of course the glaring example of it, and we have sort of skated around the word here, is that this book has been by many people claimed to be an allegory for the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And Burns, as far as I could tell, I looked, like I said, I can't find a ton of him talking about this book, but he never really attributes it to HIV or AIDS. It's really hard, especially considering this book starts in 95, which is the tail end of the peak of the AIDS epidemic, which, as far as I think the WHO is concerned, is still an ongoing epidemic. But really the peak is obviously the late 80s. But 95, it's still very much a part of society when this book starts. And for you to go into a book reading a story about a sexually transmitted disease that is uncurable and turns the people that get it into basically ostracized members of the community.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more obvious AIDS allegory. Whether or not Burns intended it or not, it's impossible to separate those two things in this book.
100%.
And I think that's a big thing we talk about often.
I felt like it was so explicit that I felt stupid when I was like after I finished it, I'm like, so this is like it's on the nose, right? Like this is what it's about. But I mean, like, yeah, I couldn't think of anything.
And I think even the journey, the journey of the book, written from 95 to 2005, which is really as we decrease in, that's basically the decline from 97, I think, is the global peak of AIDS when I looked it up. And then over the coming 8 years to 2005, coincidentally, is when it drastically declines. And you can see that in the book itself. The focus in the early issues is really about the bug, the transmission, people's response to it. A lot of Chris in particular, her anxiety is about people discovering that she has this and her running away from her parents because she's got it. And by the end of the book, it's not really a concern, to the point at which Keith has sex with a woman who very much has it. And it isn't really a concern of his. He's not worried about it at all.
Yeah, it's like very like, I mean, it's a part of him. And like, I think like besides like 2 or 3 pages, it's barely even an acknowledgement about his thing. He's very much thinking for himself.
Yeah.
In a way. And I think Keith, in a sense, though, is very interesting in this way that he initially interacted with that group where he was very much reached a big breaking point, I guess, with his identity and was like, oh, I found a new community of people who are very welcoming and open and willing to listen to me, but I'm not necessarily a part of them.
Right.
But at the same time, like, you see that he's also just kind of a shithead to a sense where he's like, in a way, using these people. Like, he's not really acknowledging and want to be a part of it. I mean, even I think to the point he's like, I just don't want to be around these people anymore because, like, he couldn't use them anymore. Like, he couldn't use them for that emotional backstab that he wanted as soon as he was able to find something else. So I think that's another, you know, people just kind of wanting to get rid of the problems if things don't really affect you kind of thing. I guess.
And you're referring to the I think issues 8 and 9, where we get sort of the two versions of the story that's happening in the McCluskey's house of Chris's interpretation of it and Keith's interpretation of it. I think that's my favorite part of the book. And you see that, like, so much of this book, which has been, I don't think I even really realized it until those 2 issues, that we have these 2 characters whose stories are entirely parallel. And it starts off in this way where a lot of young men, I'm sure, have experienced it, where they are obsessing over, Keith is obsessing over this woman, Chris, who doesn't even know he exists. And like every panel of Keith's story is him like imagining and fantasizing, and even there's like panels where Keith is talking to other characters, and he and like above that is Chris, like basically floating above the fray, and like his entire mentality is about thinking about Chris. And then when we flip back to her story, she sees him once in biology class, and then immediately after that is thinking about Rob at this party, has sex with Rob, and is only concerned with Rob. And then and then he follows her basically into the woods, and that's her interaction with him. And then at no point until then at those 2 issues, 8 and 9, in the McCluskey's house, when he then basically forces himself back into her life, does she even think about him? His name is not mentioned in her issues. No,
not at all. And like, I mean, if anything, it's her annoyance, but it's so much of like, he only did it. I mean, like, and that's the thing though. He's like, he was annoyed when they showed up because he's like, he had this thing.
To be fair, if I was house sitting for some people and then like 6 people I didn't invite showed up that lived there, I would be livid.
Oh, no. It makes sense. I'm just saying that, like, from a thematic point of view. But, no, in a sense, though, I would be like, nah, get the fuck. It would be immediately like, no. This was a one-night thing, and you ruined my kindness. Get the fuck out of the house.
It's
I will call the police.
Even that is, like, I think the thing I really like about this book, which I don't know if I've said yet, is it is such an expert examination of teenage angst. I think Burns taps into like what it is to be like in the throes of your hormonal development and like have no idea how to deal with that or interact with the members of the opposite sex or the same sex. And Keith's story, who, like you said, Keith is a shithead. I do not like Keith. I think is one of the best examples of a teenage boy I've seen displayed in any medium. I mean, even that is like, he does this thing that is so incredibly stupid. This family entrusted him with his house, and he brings this girl who doesn't even fucking know who he is back there because maybe she'll have sex with him. It's basically his plan.
That's it. Yeah, that's basically it.
Which, listen, I never did anything that insane, mostly because I didn't have access to people's houses while they were abandoned. But I'm sure I would have as like a 17-year-old idiot. You're just so dumb then, blinded
You
by
in
all
your
these
own
things.
head.
Yeah, and
yeah, exactly. Like it was like pretty much. I mean, even other characters call him out about it. It's like
Yeah.
you don't even know her. You're making this fantasy about her in your head about like all these things. And like he's like, why are you mad about this? And I was like this doesn't affect you. It's like not your thing. And also you're really obsessed with bologna sandwiches, man.
the bologna sandwich is it's beautiful writing because
Yeah.
it is like I loved that part. One, it sounds disgusting. First of all, white
It
bread, iceberg lettuce, Miracle Whip, and bologna is a vile sandwich. One.
I just realized there's nothing besides
Oh, it's
lettuce. It's lettuce and bologna. Like not even cheese or anything else in it. It's
vile.
just
It sounds
that's
disgusting.
horrible.
But
That's a horrible thing.
we're introduced to it in Keith's perspective in one of his first person stories when Lizzie gives it to him. And it is like this, I still think a little bit troubling, but for Keith, a beautiful moment where he has this sexual awakening with this older woman who feeds him a sandwich and gives him weed. And then we see that same...
Tale as old as time.
Listen, I've seen that movie before. and he
Honestly, bologna sandwiches and weed is a really good like mid-20s like memoir net title. That's a really good book title.
yeah.
Somebody steal that. It's not my book title.
I'm cutting
but
that
I
out.
want
That's my book title now.
Oh,
That's
fair.
not
That's okay.
nobody in the public's gonna hear that. That's mine. Now.
That's fair. That's fine.
But then we see that same the sandwich, that same like totem, reflected back in the first person story from Chris's point of view, where she's like, why does this fucking guy keeps making this exact same sandwich for her? Because for him, it is like this demonstration
Like
of
all-
love and adoration. And for her, it is this grotesque like insertion of himself into her life, and he's like, I know what she's gonna want, this sandwich I love, and I'm gonna keep giving it to her every single time I see her. It is
Psycho.
It's so in touch with like young men. I'm really speaking to like Keith's experience because obviously I've never been a young woman, so I think Chris's story is really well written. I can't speak to how true to life it is, but Keith's experience is like, there's so many stuff I see in there where I'm like, God, I was like this idiot who thought I was in love with girls when I was 14. Of course I wasn't.
Yeah.
I didn't even know how to pay taxes yet. I'm still not.
No, not at all. Yeah, no. Still figuring that out. Thank you, extensions.
Yeah. Any other big overarching themes you wanted to touch on before we jump into some?
No, I think those kind of we did like touch on everything that I felt like was kind of like what was on my brain when I put down this book. Because I did pretty much read it in like one sitting.
It's as big as it is a pretty fast read. I've read it. I think first time I read it was 6 or 7 years ago, maybe not that long ago. But then in the last couple of months, I've read it twice over, and it sort of blazes by, partially because obviously Burns is not really dialogue dense, which I think for some stories works and for some stories doesn't. And I think for this, he really lets the narrative, the themes play in more sparse scenes, which I think is good. I wish he didn't rely as much on voiceover, basically, as like narration.
You just don't like voiceover.
I think it's almost never good. It's rarely.
It's only good in detective stories.
Yeah.
And I think that's honest. I think detective stories are the only time I get what you got to be pulpy. And I kind of do get introspection, but at the same time, it's like there's so many teenage movies about introspection that we don't really need that about. Like so much of the scenes where he's just walking by himself with the whole like, especially the scene with Keith when he's walking through after doing acid, and kind of having this like freak out around the people around him. I could have done this without any dialogue. Yeah. I could have just had him wandering through the woods. I didn't need anything to be described about what was happening, especially because he does recap it to the rest of the people. But like, I don't think I needed that. I think like in a way like that page was just really funky that it was just like but.
Especially in a book like this, which is in most ways is not really interested in holding its readers' hands.
No.
It will let you draw your own conclusions about the themes it's trying to present. The fact that Burns, I think at times, gets a little too afraid to just let the story tell itself. Like that scene is a perfect example where you could have just had him stumbling through the streets of Seattle and let that play out visually. He is not as bad as some other people. Like, obviously, we love Neil Gaiman, praised him from top to bottom, but Neil Gaiman is terrified of letting his audience live in silence for a second.
He cannot do it. I love him to death, but yeah, no, it's like I love him to death, but he will not. He likes to write.
Yeah, he's. I mean, he is very much a novelist first, and I think a comic book.
A comic book, but he's still very good at the comic
yes,
book
no,
thing,
Sandman.
If anybody else was doing it, it would be horrible.
Yeah.
He can do it well, but even then, it's still like, you write a lot, motherfucker. But I love him, so it's fine.
As with all rules in art, it is about learning when you can and can't break those rules. And one of my rules personally is I just don't think voiceovers really ever work, except for when they do. And I think in Black Hole, it's not, for me, it's not like terrible, but I just wish there was at times I'm like, I don't know if I need Chris and Keith to be telling me exactly what's happening on the page for every panel. But
I think honestly the only time I would like kind of wanted Chris's like probably introspection, because she's the one else to actually bounce things off of, was like that final issue.
Yes.
Or like her final 2 issues, and I'm like, I think that's the only time where she just has nobody really to.
That's all
I think actually I think Chris's works a lot better than Keith, because I think Chris does spend time a lot more as by herself, but Keith is so much a reactionary character to what's around him that he doesn't really need that introspective things. I mean, even the pages, like, he'll be this internal monologue, and then he'll meet up with, then he meets that crew of people, and I'm like, he tells them the same thing we just read about, and I'm like, this is a bit redundant. We didn't need to do that. Like, you know.
Yeah, I agree.
But, yeah.
I 100% agree. I think in a lot of ways, as we said, Burns figures out over the course of these 12 issues that Chris is the main character, and I think a lot of ways her story is much more rewarding than Keith's. Although I think they need each other. I think this book doesn't.
We definitely need the crossover.
Yeah, without both. But I wrote down a couple influences, and again, we spoke about artist intention or not. And I'm not saying that like Burns himself is like has notes on all these things, but for me, when I was reading them, I really was pulling out very similar themes from these works. The first one, obviously, this is influenced dozens and maybe even hundreds of works in the English canon since, but Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, and
very much so.
I will admit that I could not finish The Scarlet Letter because
it's like 1984. We get the themes, we understand the basics of it. We don't need to go through the book entirely. I think 1984 is the boringest shit book, and I will stand by that.
Yeah, I like Animal Farm. 1984 is not my favorite of George Orwell's books.
So boring.
I will admit. But I can't say I've read a lot of books from the 1800s that have really captured my attention. But I did start... Listen, maybe I'm just not smart enough, Corey. Maybe that's what it is. But
that's what it has to be one of us, so it's okay.
Especially in Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter, the beginning of the book really stuck with me, which is, of course, we see the main character, Hester Prynne. I got there at the end. And she is being like basically lambasted in the center of town because she had an extramarital affair, and the imagery from those opening passages of the book that stuck with me is like how the women are so indignant of her existence because she is like beautiful and stoic and taking this humiliation with grace. And that scene, in a way, I found really reflected in the scene at the lake when this character, Chris, who we know is like we said, with popular, straight A, beautiful, all the boys love her, sort of like idyllic high school girl, goes to swim in the lake, and everyone finds out she has the bug because they see the skin on her back has been basically like infected or splitting or whatever it is. All start to laugh, and the girls are so horrified of it.
I'm just saying, though, as someone who's in high school, though, I just don't think I've ever like been in a situation where someone was like, "Oh, look at that person, they got STD." I don't think maybe my high school wasn't horrible. Yeah. It wasn't good. I'm just saying that I feel like that's like in all those movies. I'm like, haha, this is funny. I'm like, I've never been like back home. I'm like, yo, it was really funny that person got an STD. Like, that was crazy.
I feel like we end up saying that a lot when we talk about high school stuff, where we're like, I don't remember people being this fucking evil as bullies in high school, or like as
Stephen
cliquey
King bullies
or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think it either is the case that high school is very different now, or high school is very different where we live.
Oh, I thought it was going to be like, we're the bad guys then. Like,
It's also entirely possible
we're just
evil.
dickheads. Yeah, that's also true.
I want to run through a couple more influences.
Sure.
So in 1996, not before, but during, there is, of course, Scream, which is this resurgence of the teen horror. Scream, the movie. The resurgence of the teen horror movie. And even Scream is referencing...
Scream's a satire, too.
Yeah, and pulling from a lot of things that I think this book is pulling from, and it also clearly influenced by, which is like the promiscuity and the morals of horror movies, where this book is very much on the nose with, like, if you have sex, if you do drugs, if you drink alcohol, you will be punished. And in a lot of cases, you will die. And I don't know if that's intentional from Burns, but
I think he's supposed to be. I don't think he believes that. I think it, to me, is more of like very much like this is what people think about this kind of vibe.
I think
like,
it's a horror book,
we
right?
yeah. I mean, we treat people like monsters, and that's kind of a lot of it. I think, except for the pretty ones and the straight white guys,
right? Until they too become monsters, right?
Exactly,
because they cross the line of morality.
How dare they?
Last two influences I have. Todd Browning's Freaks, the 1932 pre-code German like horror classic, which is basically a story of love and betrayal, and set in the like a carnival freak show basically, and is quite controversial, but has over the years become popular and like really bled into modern culture, and is, I think, very influential, especially on the stuff we see with Rick and the McCluskey house and all the teens living in the forest. Reminds me a lot of the imagery and themes we see in Browning's Freaks. And last but not least, of course, and in every single interview I read from Burns, he either brings up this book or the interviewer asks him about this book. And I think, obviously, in the 90s, during comics, it was inescapable. I still think one of the greatest works of fiction in the medium or outside, and that is Art Spiegel's Mouse, which in itself uses, like, surrealism and the medium of comic books to touch on real-life horrors.
I think Mouse is... I don't know if we'll ever touch on that book in this podcast, but like I think...
I should remember, did we not do a book club on Mouse?
I don't think so. I think we definitely did talk about it, and I think I definitely reread it when the whole controversy happened recently, where people, when they got banned from some schools.
Yes, but I don't think it was a controversy. I think it was morons doing stupid shit.
Yeah, it was stupidity. It was fucking stupidity, yeah, no. But also, I was going to mention that Charles Burns actually kind of got some of his illustration career started... at a magazine that Art Spiegelman was actually the editor on. Yeah. So I'm sure there was a bit of like an influence there.
But visually quite similar styles.
And in a way, though, I kind of do like feel like this with Mouse, where it's just like, I feel like this is one of those things where like it's so weird and out there. It's not even Mouse, where I'm like, I think everyone should read Mouse just as a general person that exists in society. Yeah. But I do think that Black Hole probably could do pretty... Yeah, of course, it would never be allowed in like a high school thing. But I mean, I really kind of wish I kind of read it like... in high
college
school
classes. I read books.
I think more. I just think people are just more like, oh, I can see it, so that makes it bad. I mean, I think that's why Mouse got fucking banned, because of that same shit. Yeah. So, fucking idiots.
I think Mouse got banned because there was Holocaust deniers in America for some reason in the year of our Lord 2023.
Fucking insane.
Should we take a quick break and come back? And
let's take a break.
Some more.
I did what I did for the good of the realm. The realm. Do you know what the realm is? It's the 1,000 blades of Aegon's enemies. A story we agree to tell each other over and over till we forget that it's a lie.
But what do we have left once we abandon the lie? Chaos. A gaping pit waiting to swallow us all.
Chaos isn't a pit. Chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail, and never get to try again. The fall breaks them.
And we're back.
What's up?
All right. First up on the docket as we break everything down more concretely. We'll do the bad first, and then we'll get to the good. Points of criticism, which there isn't much. Like we said, I think this is a master work, celebrated by everybody, including us. But we did have a couple, really just 2 points of criticism. Corey, you want to do yours first, and then we'll talk about the one that we share?
Well, it's a really confusing thing about the idea that he doesn't actually say this is something that he actually drew as a theme for, but I just kind of felt like the metaphor or whatever it is was a bit too much slapping me in the face a bit.
Yeah.
And I kind of do wish it was a bit more subtle.
Yeah, the lack of subtlety, I think, is the big thing, especially for me. I mean, not even just the metaphor, which I just don't buy that this doesn't have anything to do with AIDS, or maybe he just
My ass.
Maybe
Like,
maybe
there's
I
no
just didn't
fucking
find
way.
that particular interview. Let's just say in my research he never mentions it. He doesn't ever specifically say it isn't either. So I should say maybe he is not. He is agrees to that.
Trying to keep it as broad as he possibly can.
But there's also just other stuff where I'm like, this is a bit on the nose, and I think the fact that like horror movies, as we've talked about, and horror books and horror in general, can be unsubtle. It's kind of the point of the genre, is you can be over the top and on the nose, and you can make your movie about the promiscuous girl gets killed and the jock gets killed and all these like stereotypical. That's why I love Cabin in the Woods, because it turns everything up to 11.
Movie fucks.
But there's a couple things in this book. I made 3 particular instances where I thought the subtlety was like, come on, Chief. Is the drug dealer's dog being named Faust is crazy bad. That part I was like, this is like lit kid 101 shit, and you're being like, oh, it's a Faustian bargain if you choose to have sex and they get the. It's like, this is not clever. It's just annoying, and nobody's gonna name their kid Faust or their dog Faust.
I don't know. Those guys kind of seem.
They
pretty
did
up
seem
their own
like
ass.
pretty up there. That's true. Maybe those guys would name their kid Faust. The visual motif early, which does
I think it was,
drift
like, on
away.
the first, it was like on the first fucking page.
It's in the opening page of this book. I'm not entirely sure. I can show it on YouTube, so I'm not gonna bring up the pages. But if you're curious, if you should have already read along this, should have read this book already. But if you haven't, go check out
your homework.
Yeah, go check out the early parts of this book. There is a visual motif through, I think, like I want to say the first 4 or 5 issues that does start to peter out as the book goes on. But the visual motif of like the gash, the black hole, he's basically drawing a vagina. Georgia O'Keeffe would be like, come on, man, tone it down a bit. It's like, it is so on the nose that I'm like, even if you had just did a regular like cut in the frog instead of literally drawing a vagina on the frog, I would have gotten the point that you were getting across.
Yeah. But
yeah,
you didn't want. Yeah, that was a bit. Yeah, I was kind of like, I'm like, I get it, man. Like it's just like, I'm like, I get it.
Sure. 20.
I'm like, it's like I don't think I don't want to say like I'm treating like an idiot, but I'm like, I get it, man. Like, I get it. Reading comprehension.
And
it's hard for some people.
There is something to like maximalism. If you're just gonna do it and do it and do it, there is like a approach to that I think can work sometimes. I just don't know if it was necessary in this particular recurring motif, because it's also pretty clear we get that like in this book, sex is the thing that really like sends you over the edge, is the temptation that brings you over to the dark side, essentially. I don't know if we needed him to draw a vagina on every single page, but listen, I'm also not like a prude. I'm not like no vaginas in my book.
I am, honestly. This book was, I just too much, man. Come on, tone it down.
The sex is not fun. I wouldn't call this a sexy book.
Just like, honestly, this is not what I need on my Christian eyes.
And the last one I pulled that in particular, I think this is in general a weaker part of the book, but I don't. There are parts in Rick's issue, the Rick storyline, that I think are good, but it's so abrupt and it's so on the nose. Like, we don't really know who this Rick character is. We see him on occasion in the background of scenes. Where he has a couple brief lines, and then suddenly he is the incel
bad guy,
school shooter, basically.
I mean, basically that's what he is. Yeah, and like it does kind of feel like a bit out of nowhere, where it went from like, and I get what it was kind of going for, like this person he's nice, but he's nice with a fucking motive, and that kind of insidiousness that is a person. And I mean, like, in that, the idea that he does kind of come out of nowhere and it's this kind of like very haunting force was very scary.
Yeah.
But I felt like with like Rob being killed, I'm assuming it was under Rick's orders, or that's what it kind of seemed like to me or something. But I was kind of just...
Yes. I think, especially based on the reflection we get from Chris when she realizes like the dolls and the footprints outside of her tent are from Rick, I think you're supposed to gather that he wanted Rob killed so that he could have her all to himself.
Yeah.
Which is again a recurring motif of this story, where like young men, have this undue attachment to women that have no idea about their existence, and this like feeling of possession.
Possession and like, I need to protect this person who didn't need to be, didn't ask to be.
Certainly didn't need and definitely didn't ask.
Nope.
But I think a lot, again, I keep wanting to bring up, like, we have to remember this book was written over 10 years. The Rick storyline feels like a response in the same way that, like, the early part of this book is Burns coming out of the throes of AIDS, like the America that Burns lives in is coming out of the throes of AIDS. And then by the middle part of this book, I mean, 1999 is when we have the Columbine shooting. And we have really, for the next 20, I mean, we're still really in it. The next 24 years is a lot of the angst around teen safety is about school shootings. And this Rick storyline feels like it was never really part of his plan to start this book 10 years, however many years ago in this issue.
Yeah, because I was going to ask about that too. Like, what was the significance about like the chopped off arm and stuff like that? Like, I felt like I was expecting something a bit more like, I mean, I'm assuming it was that guy that he ends up killing in the very end with after the KFC scene.
I think that's what it is. It's just, you're just getting hints that there is somebody evil lurking in the background, and the reveal that it is Rick who then goes and kills all his friends and
felt
himself
a bit
in the
unearned.
woods is again, but it just feels like a guy who's responding to a thing that is horrific. Like, you just and I think a lot of people had no idea how to respond to Columbine.
Agreed.
Agreed. And this is like a manifestation of not just that, but like those events and that realization that, like, in 95, I don't think anyone was really thinking about kids getting shot at school, and then 5 years later, it's all anyone's concerned about. So I understand where it's coming from, but I do think, or I'm hypothesizing that's where it's coming from, but I do also think that it is quite on the nose, like a lot of stuff in this book.
Yeah, agreed.
And Cory, to your second point, which I think we did talk about a bit, the story progression.
Yeah, I think we dived into it a bit already, but yeah, it felt like, I mean, like, I guess that's maybe the thing about doing it for so long, but I definitely felt like some stories were going at a different speed than the other stories, and I think that problem did kind of throw off like some of the bigger beats of things, where I felt like a lot of things were happening so quickly for one character, and so other characters going through this whole like this whole change within the span of like 3 days. So it definitely does feel a bit.
Yeah. He said in his interviews, and you can see some things really return from even like the first issue into the last issue. He had this all planned out, the big beats, but as he admits, things shift over time. And I wonder how much of that, like, things feeling rushed is he felt like certain parts of the narrative, certain characters became more important or less important as he started to read it. I really think that I wish I'd been able to find this a confirmation of this, or if I could just ask Burns himself. I really think he thought that Keith was going to be the main character of this book, and he realized
I think so too.
Around
I mean, he
issue
opens
6 that it's not.
Yeah, he opens up with it. I'm assuming it was very much like this teenager, like, trying to like come to terms and understand things, but I think it very quickly went into the other more interesting character.
Yeah.
Very early on.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all. I mean, really, that's the only really points of criticism.
No, yeah, and I think those are just, and I don't think those are gigantic nitpicks either. I don't think they didn't bother me. I'm just saying those are the only points of criticism I actually could think of, because Che has it on the rundown, so I have to write down something.
I think it's worth saying that, like, nothing is art isn't perfect, and if you approach everything like I think when you examine art, the flaws are often as interesting as what is succeeding and what's working. And for me, I think one of the more interesting things about this book is that you see him sort of responding to the world around him. That's why, even though I don't think Rick's storyline is good, I like that it's there in a lot of ways, because you just be like, here's this thing, this examination of the world around him. Obviously we can never live in this world, but I wonder what Black Hole looks like if he just writes it all at once in 95 and releases this big book. I'm sure it's a completely different story, and maybe a less effective one. I wonder if the 10 years really allows this book to become something better. We'll never know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on to what's working. What we really liked about this book. Some of our favorite things. So first, we touched on a lot of the big themes that we have written down, but just quickly going to run over them again. Obviously, the evolution of the book over the years. I like how it changes, but I also like how there's foreshadowing that he keeps going. As somebody who, like, if I don't touch a story for a month, I abandon it because I'm like, I can't even remember what it is. I don't want to reread it. probably hate it. I'm just like, fuck it, be gone.
Agreed.
The idea of writing something over 10 years is fascinating to me.
And also, I mean, like, just another thing, like, I feel like I do see artists, like, change their style after years, and I kind of do like that he's able to keep a very consistent, I mean, because he's a good artist already, so it's like he had it down, and I appreciate how good that was. But I mean, at the same time, what is good to me was I thought the art and the comic book paneling and layout and all of those good stuff that makes this story work like this was so well done. Like, this story doesn't work as well without this art. No. I don't think it needs this. It's why this is a good medium for this type of story, and I think it worked really well because of that.
It reminds me a lot of another book we talked about, one of my favorites from a few years ago, Monsters, that we did a book club on, I think in late 2022 or maybe earlier this year, where the art is not, again, I said, like, not aesthetically pleasing, but it is technically really proficient and fits the story so well. I think it's, like you said, this book doesn't really work without the art. I don't know if a novel of Black Hole is nearly as effective of a story. And I think even this particular style of art is really effective. We will get to in a second some of the specific pages that I think that we both think are really working. But the last big point of what's working as for me is the parallel storytelling, because especially when we see the stories briefly intersect, or we get Chris and Keith telling the same story back to back in successive issues, you realize how unreliable these narrators have really been in a lot of ways. Not like Tyler Durden, where they're lying about what's happening, but in that you can't trust them. Like in Keith's story, he seems like the innocent, nice hero, and then we see Keith in Chris's story as this, like, domineering creep, really.
Yeah.
And it's the vice versa. In Keith's story, Chris is this idyllic damsel who needs saving, who eventually becomes a burden on him. And in Chris's story, she is a tragic heroine, basically, who's lost everyone she's loved and is trying to find a place in this world because she's made one horrible mistake. And the fact that these two characters are both so well realized in their particular stories, and then the versions of themselves are such caricatures of that, I think is really expert writing from Burns.
I agree. I think this book is get carried by a few group of people that, even though I can be like, I don't really like anybody in it, but I was genuinely invested to see what happened to all of them.
Who's the most likable character?
I think Elizabeth, and she's a predator. I mean,
I kind of agree with you. That's the thing that's
I think Keith's friend with the glasses, who just was like, I just want to get high.
Who just wants to get high and watch TV.
I think that guy is probably the only decent guy.
That
he's a straight shooter. He knows what he wants to do. He's like, yo, man, you gotta chill the fuck out.
Yeah, I love that scene where he's like, hey, man, didn't you want to hang out? We're hanging out. Why are you being such a dick right now?
I love that too, because he's like, because the guy was like, I gotta get the fuck out of my house, and he's like with him. I'm like, I could be at home right now. It's like, You're the one who wanted to come hang out. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
We've all had a friend like that, though, who's like never really content with what's going on. You're just like, I don't know, man.
Which is why I don't like Keith. He's just so much of that guy.
Yeah.
Who, and those kind of people sometimes they don't lose that trait. Those people kind of just stay perpetually annoyed about their situations all the time, and I fucking can't stand
I don't think the thing that's really interesting about the story is that like Chris and Keith go over these really, you would think, life-altering story arcs. Chris has the love of her life, so she believes. She's still 16 years old. That's not the love of your life. Relax. But
No.
she has the love of her life as she knows it, die and abandon her, and she has no friends or family. And the thing that's really interesting about these two characters, which I think is kind of the point of Burns' exploration of adolescence, is they don't change. No. Keith is the same character from the beginning of the story to the end. He, like, internally, he's lost his virginity and he has a job and he thinks he's a little bit older, but everything he does and the way he thinks and speaks is the same. And you see the same thing with Chris, who is like, I mean, one of the things I'm like screaming at the book at the end is just go home.
Yeah.
Why aren't you going home?
Especially with Chris.
Yeah.
Like, that's the one, especially with Chris. It's like her family was like, and it's funny to me. Like, I got so much caught up with. I got kind of caught up with the whole teenage angst part about it. I was like, yeah, man, your parents don't understand you, and I'm like, no, wait, it's some adults who are genuinely concerned with her well-being,
right?
And not this guy who cheated on his girlfriend with you.
Yeah. It's like this. I like that the story is so segmented away from adults. They see maybe like one or two adults on the page at it.
And I think, I think it's like her parents, and that's about it.
Yeah, and they're not really key figures in the book at all, because it's a lot like Romeo and Juliet, where if you can tell the story in a vacuum, your brain forgets to tell you that these are children doing stupid things, and actually maybe the world is crumbling around them, and maybe this is the most important thing that will ever happen to them. And then you realize, like, in 10 years they'll be 27 and they won't even really remember this even happened. Probably not. People won't forget it, but it won't have been the most important thing that they ever experienced. But at the time in your life, in your senior year of high school, it feels like the world is ending if your crush doesn't like you. And
that's true.
Yeah, Burns really taps into that really beautifully. Anything else before we move on to our favorite pages and panels for art?
No, I think that's it's kind of covered what I wanted to talk about. Let's move on to the art.
All right, so I'll run through these in chronological order. We have 9 total. I'll start with mine since it's the first one. This is annoyingly, I read this. If I can read a book in physical form, I prefer to. But the annoying part about it is, in the big collected edition, there's no fucking page numbers. So
yeah,
if you have the big collected edition and you're paging through it, I'm sorry. These page numbers are as referenced by the digital copy that I have. And this is book 1, page 8. I have here, this is the opening, basically the opening of the book when Keith, quote unquote, I said, falls into the black hole in biology. He sees this gash open up on the frog, and we get a parallel to a foreshadowing of Chris's foot and her back, and then the spiraling descent, and he passes out. I think this page is really, especially early on, really jarring and shocking and really effective.
I mean, it definitely is like brings you into like, this is what, like, it's like very much like this is what this book's gonna be about. It's about weirdness, body horror, sex, and you're just gonna walk out of it just feeling a bit strange.
I think the art moments that I pulled out in particular were moments that I think were effective thematically, and that was the moment where you sort of realize what this book is going to be about. It is this descent, this way that the world takes you over and really spits you out, and this Keith literally passing out because he sees the black hole.
Yeah,
as we've already touched on, what that's an analogy for. He's like, it just destroys him, and it overwhelms him. I think is really effective, and I think that page also just looks really cool too. On top of it,
agreed.
Next up is a pick from you, Corey. So I'll throw it over to you. This is book 4, page 9.
Sorry, I also have to go through and figure out my own work.
This is the scene where Keith enters the house with the college kids.
Yeah, no, like, so this is like a scene where Keith is with his friend and they're going to buy drugs, and also this is before the introduction of Elizabeth. But I like when they walk in, because they're coming from outside where it's super bright, and they come into this very, like, you could just tell that it's like this very dark room with, you like, it's like, you can just like, in a weird way I can like smell a picture. But it just does such a good job of painting this very, like, uncomfortable thing that you're walking into and you don't want to be a part of.
No house with that Jimi Hendrix poster on the wall has ever smelled good.
No, it is not.
It's always smelled like burnt tacos and ash.
Yep. Not a good vibe. But I really just, like that whole, like, entering the unknown of just, like, I don't want to be here. It just felt uncomfortable. It felt uncomfortable to be in that scene.
Yeah, I love that scene a lot. Actually, one of the moments we're going to talk about in a second, I pulled out from later on in that scene because I think that's a lot of Burns' best work is when he is in that particular part of the book. So next up is that scene. That's actually the next one. I could just keep going. This is later, 5 pages later in page 14. We were talking about shadows and the way that Burns uses the dark and light in this book. And there is a scene where this pretty mundane thing that many of us have experienced, this exact thing or a version of it. 4 guys high in a house. One guy gets up to get a drink, and the other guys are asking him if he can bring them back a beer as well. And the way the art is, the close-ups of the faces, the way he uses shadows, it's so insidious and creepy. But literally all these guys are saying is like, hey, Keith, could you bring us back a beer as well? And it makes you real. It's like you realize you're in Keith's perspective. And like, yeah, these guys are fucking creepy and weird, but also Keith is terrified right now. And because Keith is terrified, you're also terrified with him.
He's like underage. He's got to like these people. Like it's also like very clear like power dynamic, but also dealing with idiots. Where he's like, yeah, if you want 4 beers, can you bring some more? I'm like, okay, how many fucking hands do I have, man? It's like I can't. I can't.
Yeah, I think that scene in particular was like, I think that art is because I remember reading it and being like, why do I find this so creepy? Because all these guys are really saying is like, bring us a beer, but it's so unnerving. Works really well. Next up, another one of my pulls from book 5, and this is when Chris is night. She's out on the lake with her friend Marcy, and this is book 5, page 24. This is another similar to the first issue that we pulled. Basically, like a descent, like the way that Burns uses like chaos and madness. When Chris is reflecting on these like few moments of innocence, and also her clearly her like struggling with depression and that taking over her life really, and this moment of like the blending panels and creepy eyes. And I think it's Burns has a real knack for horror and unnerving. So I just really like that page. Pulled it out. Next up, again, just reminding people, if you are just listening to this on the podcast, I mean, thank you, but you are you're missing out a fair amount. So go over there, check out the YouTube, because we are doing some good shit over there. If you're on the YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. I'm also just stalling so I can pull up this next page. Book 6, page 20. This Cory and I both pulled this out specifically, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. This is when Keith is tripping balls in Seattle.
Yeah, he's having a bad time.
I honestly just think this is like a pretty cool looking panel. I don't know if it's
just a very like
super interesting, but it just looks really cool.
Just a very fun like way to use perspective. It's also like, yeah, that guy's just having a real bad time.
It's another one where you're like, we're clearly in Keith's head, because he's just what he is. He's just walking down the street in Seattle, but the way that it's drawn and like the stories passing by, it kind of looks like he's in a horror movie. You're like, what is this creepy fucking dolls? This guy behind him looks insane. He looks insane, but you realize he's literally just walking around Seattle. So, yeah, I really like that.
Just having a weird bad trip. Keith is a fucking idiot.
He is, but he's an idiot in a way that I find so relatable, right?
Yeah.
He's an idiot in a way that we kind of not to the extent. I will not pretend, despite how stupid I was as a kid and how bad I was with women, and still am. I still don't really understand women. But, like, I was never as bad as Keith. But we all were, like, everyone struggled with this the identity, and that's what I think really Burns taps into so well. All right, next up is one you pulled, Corey. This is from book 9, page 32.
Yeah, I think like
31,
it's like probably the last page I think of like the actual book, but it's like ending with like a scene of like this is after like we mentioned earlier like Keith is becoming very overly obsessive with Chris and she's just like still very much grieving the loss of Rob, and she like escapes out of it and heads down to the local beach, and we just kind of see her floating through the darkened water. So she's kind of like surrounded by this darkness, but like the waves of white are just kind of surrounding her. And I think that's a very just like, I mean, I don't want to say like, I mean, like obviously it has its themes with it, but I think if anything, it's just a very, very pretty panel.
And I also like how that exact, not like a similar motif, that exact motif closes the book with Chris. So, book 12, page 45, we see her once again in the same spot, floating out to try to escape the world. But at this time, she sort of is like released. She gets, in a way, gets absolution from this whole thing. And I love that same, she, like you said, she's trying to like escape this suffocation she feels from Keith and like the world around her, not just Keith obviously, but like the world and life. And she goes out to this place that she has a real connection with as a child and floats out in peace. And then we get that same experience 3 issues later with her trying to escape. And again, this Chris doesn't she doesn't grow. She doesn't have a journey. This character keeps making the same mistakes, keeps really falling flat. And in a lot of ways, that is, of course, what's really relatable about her. And she comes back to the same place to try to escape. And in the end, I love, but is also quite unsatisfying, I think intentionally so.
Yeah, that's the thing about the book is it's like not a criticism because I don't, endings are hard, and I think what he wanted to end how he wanted to end it, but when it just kind of like ends like that, I'm like, oh, kind of wanted a bit more from. Yeah, I wanted I just kind of wanted to see what other happened, but I think that's kind of the point of it.
Yeah, I think in part because as we've said, this isn't the end for these characters. This isn't the end of their life. They think it is. They think the world has collapsed around them. Or in Keith's case, he thinks he's figured it all out, that he's found his true love and he's found...
True love and like this journey that he's...
And we all know those two characters are not going to be together in 6 months even. So...
Yep. Because it's not healthy. So I'm going to work at a supermarket and you can do your art. And I'm like, bro, nah, man.
I mean, in the 90s, you might have been able to get away with that.
Maybe. Honestly, it was a different time. I'm like, okay.
I really like balked at that page where he was like, we're just going to go, I'll get a job at a supermarket. We might buy a house. I was like, buy a house?
Okay.
Listen up,
Mr.
Warren Buffett.
Like, I'm genuinely impressed if I ever meet someone, like, in their 30s. Like, yeah, I bought my house. I'm like, are you a fucking
Who are your parents' name? Is it Bezos or Musk?
Pretty fucking much.
All right, next up, another one of your pulls, Corey, from the Rick episode issue.
Yeah, Rick, this is kind of like, I don't know, I think this scene instead, it might be probably a better scene. Mm-hmm. I should have probably kept it for that. But first off, it's a very like explicitly drawn KFC, which is just kind of like, I don't think it has anything to do with anything, but it was just really weird that was
like... Yeah, I clocked that and I was like, were just rules different back then? Because I don't think you could just put a KFC in a book now.
I don't know. Maybe because people just like didn't, it just was like, it happened and no one really acknowledged the kind of vibe.
And I guess comics were still pretty new that they were just like, I'm sure no guy at KFC was even like bothering to look at this.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's like the scene of Rick going to try to buy some food from KFC, and then he gets harassed by a guy behind him, involving Rick to pull out a gun and then spitting in his mouth, basically, which is such a visceral and gross scene, but like also like just so like, I don't really know the word for it. I felt like disgusted, but at the same time I'm like also like, yeah, fuck that dude. But it was like a lot of emotions that like came out in this in introduction scene. It was been a pretty simple scene of him just buying food, and then it becomes like that entire violent exchange.
And I think very much intentionally, it's no accident that the person that Rick, who we've already said is pretty clearly like a parallel to these incel, which that term didn't really exist then, but these incel school shooters, is like the person he has a confrontation with is a handsome white man with a girlfriend. It's like, it's pretty clear who Rick is angry at in the world and what triggers the ensuing events of this issue. I like this scene a lot. I do think, as we said, that it's in the middle of a story that I think is a little bit on the nose, but that scene
very
in
much
itself
so.
is really effective. And it is also
I think
it's just weird seeing just KFC explicitly.
It's just a weird fucking. I think it's just like it's so weird, and also we don't really get a lot of like Rick as a character. No. Like before that kind of thing, he's like kind of just like a chill guy, but this is like it's kind of getting peeled back that he's.
I mean, I think by that
we know
scene he's been on 7 pages total.
Yeah, it's not a lot.
Being conservative, I'm guessing,
But he's another guy, like, he's, like, there, but we don't really pick up on him. I mean, if you also just points out, like, he also was in a class with her. In a way, he's kind of like, what if Keith went, like, in the bad direction of it? Keith kind of, like...
stories are very parallel, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what Keith was like, Keith was a piece of shit, but at the same time, he also recognized, he's like, you know what? I'm done. Like, I'm kind of like, I'm out of here. Like, I'm like, I'm good.
I do fear... I don't know if this was the intent, but you could certainly pull a reading from the story that, like, the thing that separates Rick, who kills a bunch of his friends and then himself, and Keith, is that one of them has sex, the other one doesn't.
Yeah, I wasn't.
And it's like this thing where, like, if you're a virgin, you'll become angry and kill everybody. Is like not, again, the morality of this book. If you read it as a moral story, which I don't think it is. I don't think Burns is saying, I don't think you're supposed to. This is what is good and this is what is bad. But if you make that mistake, you could really come away from the story being like, sex and drugs and alcohol are all terrible. They'll get you killed. And also,
I definitely can see someone walking away from this being like, that's what I've learned from this. Yeah. And I'm like, you're not really supposed to learn anything from it, I don't think.
No.
You're not, like, I mean, you're supposed to, like, I mean, the themes are there, but I just don't really feel like I'm supposed to walk away being like, my life has changed.
This isn't a fable. I don't think it has any intention of being a fable. All right, one last piece of art that I pulled out before we'll move on to our favorite moments and scenes, and that is another pretty similar to the scene of Chris at the lake with Marcy is when Chris realizes that Rick has been her tormentor this whole time. This is book 12, page 35, closing in on the end of the book. But we just get this like harried, scattered collection of really like a montage of the scene. She looks back and it's like these dolls that were attached to the tree and the footsteps and all these things, and realizing that it was Rick the whole time. And that, I think, is the moment where she realizes that it was also Rick that killed Rob. And it's just like, again, it's a pretty effective use of horror and shadow. And that whole page, I'm looking at it now, I would guess like 85% of it is just pitch black. And the way that he uses the light and dark of this black and white medium is really, really fascinating. That is it. Those are the 9 that we pulled. Like I said, a lot of really good art in this book. Burns is an accomplished cartoonist. But next up, and finally for our discussion on Black Hole, is our favorite scenes. Cory, did you so the one you wanted to highlight, of course, was the Rick.
Yeah, I think the Rick one. But I also think there was one scene that I really I think it might have been. I mean, like, we talked about it a bit earlier, though, like, the first scene with Elizabeth, and I'm like, that scene was just such a weird, but, like, also, like, understanding what the scene was kind of about, like, the intro, like, the meeting between the two of them. But honestly, like, also, like, I mean, the scenes in general, like, the common things with Chris. Mm-hmm. I liked the beach with her. Yeah. And I like whenever we return there for her there. It's just, like, always a different moment in her life or a different understanding. It was always something new we got out of it. Mm-hmm.
And I sort of respite also for her and the reader, right?
Yeah. And also I did notice that like we don't see her mutation besides that first scene.
No, it's just the point at which I was wondering if it was going to be revealed that like she'd been cured or something.
Yeah.
We see her peeling in the tub at the McCluskey's house. Is the only other test. We see it basically twice. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very intentional that in some for some people, this manifests in a way that makes you like an outcast of society. Rick being one of them, who is like a ghastly figure, and it is obvious when he's walking around. For Chris and Keith, it's not.
You know,
they could easily just go back home. They could have done it.
Yeah,
but
they could have been fine.
Same with Lizzie. Yeah. All right. So
what about you, John?
I pulled out 5 scenes. So first up I have is in book 2. This is the scene where Rob and Chris first have sex, and it is again pretty on the nose, but I think it really works here. It's like they have sex in a cemetery, and there's even a line where Chris is saying, we were sitting in a big dark graveyard surrounded by 1 million dead bodies. I mean, the idea of losing your virginity surrounded by death is very much the theme of this book, is that like sex and death are so intertwined.
Yeah.
For I was gonna say for good or for bad, but I mean like whether or not that is the criticism that Burns is making about sex is not, I don't think, the point of the book, but it's certainly in this story narratively, sex and death are very much one and the other. And in 95 and in, you know, the late 80s, that was the case. As people were terrified of you'd been terrified of sex because of the AIDS epidemic, and yeah. I really he has to have done this intentionally, right?
It has to be. No, 100%. Like, I don't believe that. It's like, you know, maybe he was like, I don't want to make it entirely about that, and I can understand that being like.
And the book isn't about that by the end.
It's not that, but I can understand. I can understand him being like, I don't want that to be like the label of like what this book is. I think it's a part of it, but maybe he doesn't want it to be like, this is what my book is only solely about. And maybe he thinks that if he is labeled as that might be you know, that's the thing they might be stuck with for like, you know.
Right. Next up from book 3, page 23. This is, I think, the first moment where we realize, 1, what this story is really about, and 2, what kind of character Keith is. And this is Keith finds out from his friends that Chris, once again, a girl who does not even really know he exists, has the bug and has been like, she accidentally exposed that to her friends. He doesn't know that it was an accident. But then we see him like walking into the woods thinking about like, why would she do that? How could she do this to me? What a, like, basically comes up and right up to the line of being like, what a slut. It's like, oh God, Keith is not a good guy.
Good guy.
Yeah.
I think that scene's a good way to just be like, oh, this is actually who Keith is.
Right.
Like, this is our first, like, we were getting layers of it, but we might just be like, this guy's just kind of like, you know, like, lost. He's a lost teenager. We're like, oh no, Keith kind of sucks. He sucks.
It is like, it is the teenage experience though to feel like, teenage experience is selfish. You feel like you are the center of the world. And that's sort of the point of it, is like, for a time being you get to be, until you have to have responsibility for others and so on and so forth. But I think this experience with Keith is like both so relatable and also so distancing. You're just like, oh God, Keith, just this terrible thing is happening to somebody else that doesn't have anything to do with you, and the fact that you've somehow done the
made it about you.
To make it about yourself is
such a jackass. Such a jackass.
Like I said, I don't love any of these characters, but I think they're all so expertly written.
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, they're all interesting, and I enjoyed following them along, but they all suck.
Yeah. A quick pull that I have here is book 4, page 22. This is the first moment that Keith is taken down into the basement by Lizzie, and it's mostly just a scene of like, you will never guess what happens next. Basically, it's like they're walking down the stairs.
Yeah, and that's like, oh my God, like I cannot imagine walking into that room and not being like, you know what, I'm good.
I mean, honestly, if Elizabeth wasn't drawn as a beautiful woman, just imagine this interaction with her. This woman feeds you the worst sandwich that's ever been made.
But you love it for some fucked up reason.
Because you're an idiot. And I guess because it's the 70s and we didn't have like food yet in the 70s. People were still putting everything in Jell-O for some reason.
Sure.
And then she takes you downstairs into her room and opens the door into the most horrifying art studio that anyone has ever witnessed. And you're like, okay. And the other thing I like about the scene too is also the images in this, the insects and the devils and all that stuff, continues to play out throughout the book through the next 8 issues. But we've already sort of seen we've already seen motifs of these early in Keith's mind when he faints in the first book, on basically the third page of this book. We see insects in the panels and everything, and Elizabeth's fascination with like centipedes and dissected frogs and all these terrible things, horrifying things on the wall. Very much a repeating motif in this book. I just love it. It's such a funny idea to me to be like, oh my god, I'm walking downstairs, I'm gonna have sex with this beautiful older woman. Huh?
Oh no. I gotta go.
I think it's like you touch on the fact that like he is so smitten and like obsessed with this idea of losing his virginity that he cannot leave, even though it's maybe the biggest red flag of all time.
And after this interaction, she seems like a pretty straightforward person. But
she seems weirdly reading normal.
But I was like kind of glancing over some lines just now about like what she was saying, like and stuff like that. And there was like straight up like a line of, hold on, let me see if I can find it. She's like, of course there's a girl, it doesn't matter. Come on, come over, lay down for a moment. You need to relax. It's okay. You can trust me. I won't hurt you. I promise.
Oh, it's very creepy shit.
That's like that, like just like by itself. I was like, oh, I guess I just glanced through that line the first time. I'm like, oh my god, you sound like a predator.
Yeah. Elizabeth's character is very unnerving when you read into her more closely.
I should go back again when I reread this. Actually, take actually pay attention to her character, because I think like that's a whole other part of it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in a lot of ways Keith and Chris are supposed to be equally victims in their own stories.
I think so.
Next up I have book 6, page 14, and this is Keith and his friends high at Jill's house. We talked about it a little bit already, where I just love this because it's such a perfect example of a unique teen experience where you're like, you went over to your friend's house and he invited you over, like he basically carted you along because you all kind of had to do stuff together just so we could have sex with this girl in a different room, and you and your friends sit on the couch high waiting for her friends who were not showing up, and you're just like, what the fuck am I doing here? Is this worth it? Has my life really come to this point? And we watch Keith go through all of these emotional experiences, and then of course the best part is when his friend is just on the couch, high as shit on LSD, laughing his ass off, and Keith is having a bad time.
Yeah, just Keith is having a bad trip, and then like it's just like everything just went wrong.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that friend right there is probably the chillest guy in this book so far.
Oh, for sure.
Like you didn't, but I think my thing about this whole thing with that interaction, I guess with one of my first annoyances with him is like, Keith, you did not know what the fuck you were doing that night, and they were like, we're doing this thing, and you know what? It does suck. You know what? Yeah,
it sucks. It's happened to all of us.
It's a shitty night, but you know what, man? You're in the fucking Seattle and you're in high school, and this is an era before the internet.
Right.
Just sit down on the couch, enjoy some funny TV, and chill the fuck out, you weirdo.
It's true. Like the era pre the internet was really like defined by boredom, I think, in a lot of ways. Like these just kids being fucking bored. Like you would see, and we talked about Dazed and Confused. Dazed and Confused is mostly mostly a movie about people just driving around in cars listening to music because there was nothing else to do.
There's nothing to go out. There's like just like go. I mean, but that movie just felt so of that like point of your life where it's just like, I gotta go to this party. The party's shut down. Gotta go to this thing. It's shut down. What the fuck are we doing? And at night you're just standing around in some undisclosed location, and that's fun.
Yeah. All right, my last scene, which again we've touched on a lot. This is my favorite part of the book by far, but I just wanted to again point this piece out. This is in book 9, issue 7. Book 9, page 7. This is Chris's version of the story with Keith, and I think it all plays together. The way that Keith is, the way he's drawn in this is different than the way he's drawn in his own books. He looks, shadows across his face. The expression on his face. He just looks really predatory and insidious, and we see Chris have this experience of being like, she right now is grieving, trying to escape the world, but is vulnerable because she has left her home, has no food or really any resources or shelter. And then we just watch Keith prey on that in a way that I think he believes is helpful. Like, he thinks he's being kind and helping this girl, as we see in his version of the story that comes in the next issue, where he thinks he's like saving this as we said, damsel in distress. And from her perspective is like this guy who she ends up going to the house because she needs a shower and to do some laundry, and you realize that she's like, I just don't want to sleep with this man, and I hope he doesn't make me. And you have this like real kind of horrifying tension in that scene, and it was the way to see Keith that we hadn't seen before through the previous 8 issues that I think is really effective, because you just realize that like who you are in your own head is in no way representative of what people will feel about you.
Yeah, and I think Chris loses it to an extent, but Keith is like the quintessential main character in his own story. Like he doesn't he has main character syndrome. He assumes everything revolves around him.
The fucking spread that he puts out at the house when he invites her over there, a bunch of bologna sandwiches and onion dip, is
insane,
crazy shit. It's
that's when I saw that. I honestly would be fucking horrified. Somebody I barely know was like, "Yeah, we want to have dinner." I'm like, "All right, sure." And it's just like 2 candle lit, 3-course bullshit. I'm like, "Nah, man, this is how I die."
I love the line where he's like, "Oh, I got the ingredients for gin and tonic. Isn't that your favorite drink? You got the ingredients for gin and tonic? You mean gin and tonic? What are you talking?" He's making all these things that he's done, which are like basic gestures of like human kindness that you would do to like any stranger that on the street that was homeless. You give people food on the street. He's making these like, "Oh, I'm your savior."
Yeah. No, he's 100%. He's like has a savior complex, and that's like what it kind of. And I think in a way that's why it works out with Elizabeth, because she doesn't really need saving anymore. She like got herself out of her bad situation.
Right.
And I think part of it is like we're supposed to be like, oh, he kind of had a realization, and then maybe this actually is his happy ending of things.
Yeah, and I love that. I love the juxtaposition of that, her experience of Keith, and then his experience of her put back to back, and you just see that like
such a good idea.
Here are these exact same experience, and how different it is perceived from both sides, and how maybe they're both right and both wrong, and like obviously it is easier to sympathize with Chris than Keith, but in a lot of ways that like they are both so troubled. And it's again, it just like me screaming at the book, "Go home, Chris." She's got to be 5 blocks from her house. She
just should go home. I just truly like don't understand at what point. It's like, listen, like the disease doesn't kill you. It makes you look weird. Go see your parents. They're worried fucking sick.
Go home.
Yeah,
be with
go
your
home.
Mom and dad.
Your love of your life allegedly died.
Yeah.
What do you like? What else do you need out in the woods? You only she ran away because she wanted to be with him. It was really confusing.
Well, she ran away because of that, and because she was going to. Her mother had booked like a gynecologist.
Well, no, I know that. I'm just saying, but like,
she ran away to be with Rob. Yeah.
But like I know like that was like part of it. I think that was the whole like I gotta go now kind of vibe. It's like I'll never be able to see you again for sure if they find out about this.
And even
Rob's gone.
Yeah,
Rob's dead.
Even the brief moments we see with Rob and her in their situation, Rob is not he's like abandoned his girlfriend in the woods, and he's living a regular life. He just goes to school, goes home to sleep, and then comes to see her at 2 p.m. And it's like, it's like this woman who's being really abused by the men in her life and doesn't seem to really realize it in a way that's really at all distressing. But again,
it's like, yeah, absolutely. And that's so because I mean, like at the same time, like Rob is like they tone it down in our eyes a lot, I think, but like from like perspective, like he cheats on his girlfriend with you and then like dumps her, not even dumps her. His girlfriend dumps him because you said her name in your sleep.
Yeah.
And then you run away.
His like creepy ass mouth.
That's what I talk about it. We don't talk about it. We can talk about it.
Also, I mean, not to be skated over, Rob infects this woman.
Yeah.
Knowingly. Now,
but
he thinks she knows, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean,
no, it doesn't.
Just because somebody knows you have the bug or AIDS, is like not a reason that you could just go
Yeah.
and have sex with them.
Rob
is everyone in this book is both light and dark and variations of troubled and broken and good. And you see the complexities of humanity and everything. And I think that's why this book is really successful. I mean, I don't know if you have anything else specifically.
No, I don't think so. I think
but I love this book a lot.
I love this book a lot too. I'm really happy that you put it on the list. I'm happy that I was able to take my time and reread it again. But I think we pretty efficiently covered this book though.
Yeah. So, a couple reminders before we let you guys go, because as usual, we've gone long because we are the Next Time On podcast. But don't forget, follow us at Next Time On Pod on all the social media platforms, including over there on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to drop a subscribe, drop a like. And we've got coming up soon. Next episode is going to be a regular episode. We're going to be talking about probably, oh my God, what's her name? Ahsoka. We're talking about some other stuff. We haven't figured all that out yet. We got a regular episode coming for you guys. And then down the pike soon is going to be Deep Blue Sea, which Cory has to watch for like the third time in his life for some reason. He did that to himself. Don't blame me for that.
It's my fault. I'm not looking forward to this.
The next book club is Cory's pick. I don't know if you have one yet. Should we say?
I do not have one yet.
We're gonna
throw one out.
Soon.
I want to take my time. I think I had one that I really wanted to talk about, so I want to take my time and figure that out.
Yeah, we'll probably do. I think near the later end of the year, we'll do our number ones from last year. So we'll do like Ducks and maybe the Human Target. Figure some of stuff out, but we'll be announcing all that coming. Don't forget. I'm going to promise it again, and then you might not see us until like November or some shit. But we're going to come back more regularly. So don't forget to subscribe so you can see all those podcasts in your feed.
Shit, I might be unemployed soon, so might have some time.
Fuck the David Zaslav for a number of reasons. Just pay the people, man.
Just do it. Stop being a dick.
Stop being a dick. Cory, anything else for the people, Cory?
Zaslav, stop being a dick.
That could be the name of our podcast at this point. Zaslav, stop.
I would love that. Let's just spend each episode we just shit talk a CEO. That would be probably wildly successful. Actually,
probably
cut that out. That's actually might be a good idea.
Pick one fucking billionaire and just do a deep dive on how shit they are.
Honestly, that probably would be very successful. I'm not kidding. Cut this out. I'm kidding. But no, thank you guys for listening. Really good book, Che. Thanks for picking this one.
I was excited to reread it. I've been Che.
I've been Cory.
We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.